When you think of George Springer, you probably picture a World Series MVP living the dream. $150 million contract, championship rings, the kind of lifestyle that comes with being one of baseball's elite. But that's not the reality. Springer's lifestyle isn't about luxury. It's about living with a trophy that millions call fake. A voice he spent 20 years learning to use and becoming the most hated player in baseball overnight. This is the story of the boy who couldn't say his own name without stuttering. The scandal that destroyed everything he built, and how he found his voice in the place nobody expected. Growing up in New Britain, Connecticut, George Springer wasn't supposed to be a champion. He was supposed to be a kid who couldn't speak. From the time he was in elementary school, Springer struggled with a severe stutter. It wasn't just a minor speech impediment. It was the kind that made ordering food at a restaurant feel like climbing a mountain.
It came in your face?
That was his childhood. Reading aloud in class was torture. Saying his own name, George Springer, was a battle every single time. The other kids noticed. They laughed. They mocked. They imitated his stutter in the hallways. And George did what so many kids in that situation do. He went silent. He stopped raising his hand. He stopped trying to make friends. He retreated into himself, convinced that his voice didn't matter because it didn't work like everyone else's. But silence wasn't in his DNA. His father, George Springer Jr., played in the 1976 Little League World Series and later played college football for the Yukon Huskies. His mother, Laura, was a top-level competitive gymnast. They both knew what it took to be elite. They understood discipline, repetition, and mental toughness, and they applied all of it to their son's disability. Speech therapy became as routine as batting practice. Every morning before school, George would sit with his parents and practice. Simple words, his own name, over and over. It was exhausting. Some days it felt hopeless, but they never let their son quit. And they taught George that greatness wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up when it hurt. Baseball became George's other escape. On the field, he didn't need words. His actions spoke louder than anything his voice could say. And slowly, through years of therapy and relentless effort, George started to find his voice. It wasn't perfect. It still isn't. But it was his. And when he chose to wear number 4 on his jersey, he did it for deeply personal reasons tied to his journey. A constant reminder of how far he'd come. That's the lifestyle no one talks about. The hours spent not in luxury, but in therapy rooms, fighting for something most people take for granted. By the time George reached the University of Connecticut, he was dominant. Big East Player of the Year. In 2011, the Houston Astros selected him 11th overall in the MLB draft. 10 teams passed on him. George remembered every single one. But even as a professional, the stutter followed him. Reporters asked questions after games. Cameras rolled, and George had to decide, hide it or own it. For a while, he tried to hide it. Short answers. Anything to avoid stuttering on camera. In 2014, he made his MLB debut. The flashes of brilliance were undeniable, but so were the strikeouts, the inconsistency. He hit .231 as a rookie. The doubters were loud. Maybe he wasn't as good as advertised. Then 2015 happened. Then 2016. George became an all-star. He hit 29 home runs in 2016 and established himself as one of the most dynamic leadoff hitters in baseball. And he made another choice. He started speaking publicly about his stutter. He went on national television and stuttered through interviews without apology. Kids who stuttered saw him and thought, maybe I can do that too. And then came 2017. The Astros won 101 games. The World Series against the Dodgers went 7 games. George Springer was the best player on the field. 5 home runs. Tied for the most in World Series history. MVP champion. Everything he'd worked for since he was 8 years old. Unable to order a cheeseburger, it all paid off. But while the world celebrated, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something that would eventually destroy everything George had built. November 2019. Mike Fears, a former Astros pitcher, went public with a story that would rock baseball to its core. The Houston Astros had been cheating, using a camera in center field to steal signs, banging a trash can to signal what pitch was coming. And they'd done it during their 2017 championship run. In January 2020, Major League Baseball confirmed it. Electronic surveillance, trash can banging, a system designed to give Houston hitters an unfair advantage. Manager A.J. Hinch and general manager Jeff Lunau were fired. But the players, George Springer included, faced no official punishment from MLB. The court of public opinion, however, was far less forgiving. 2020 became a living nightmare. Every road stadium the Astros visited turned into a hostile war zone. Fans held up trash cans and banged them in unison. In West Palm Beach, during a game against the Nationals, the boos were so loud George couldn't hear his teammates. Fans screamed at him between pitches. They threw trash on the field. One man was escorted out after throwing a rubber trash can at George during warm-ups. Social media erupted with hate, including reported threats against Astros players. His wife, Charlize, avoided road games for safety, and the question everyone wanted answered, did George Springer personally cheat, was never fully addressed. On February 13, 2020, George and his teammates held a press conference. George said, "I am sorry for the choices that were made by my team, by the organization, and by me." But he never explained what he personally did. And that ambiguity left a permanent asterisk next to his MVP trophy. The lifestyle the world thought he had, fame, respect, legacy, was gone. Replaced by hatred, scrutiny, and the constant reminder that 2017 would always be tainted. The 2020 season was played in empty stadiums due to COVID-19, which for the Astros was almost a mercy. No fans meant no boos, but George knew it couldn't last. When the season ended, he became a free agent. In January 2021, the Toronto Blue Jays took a chance. 6 years, $150 million, a fresh start in a new country. But the baggage followed him. Road games in New York and Boston were brutal. Yankee Stadium was the worst. Cheater chants rained down every time he stepped to the plate. Fans threw baseballs with asterisks drawn on them onto the field. One night in the Bronx, a fan held up a sign that read, "Your ring is faker than your accent." It was relentless, and not everyone has forgiven him. To this day, some fans refuse to acknowledge the 2017 championship. In Los Angeles, Dodgers fans still call it the stolen ring. Online forums debate whether George deserves his success. That asterisk, it's never going away. But George stopped trying to convince his critics years ago. He realized something important. He couldn't change their minds, but he could change his focus. In Toronto, George became something different, a leader. The Blue Jays were loaded with young talent. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, Alek Manoah, and they needed someone who'd been through the fire. George showed up every day. He played through injuries, he produced at an all-star level, and he didn't hide from his past. George earned 4 all-star selections throughout his career, in 2017, 2018, and 2019 with Houston, and again in 2022 as a Blue Jay. In 2023, he hit 21 home runs and continued to mentor Toronto's young core. Off the field, George balanced stardom with family life. He's married to Charlize, and together they're raising 2 young children, finding joy in the quiet moments away from the spotlight. But then came 2024. Injuries piled up. His average dropped to a career low point, .220. He was moved out of the leadoff spot for the first time in years. The whispers started again. Maybe he's done. Maybe age finally caught up. Maybe the scandal and the hate finally wore him down. Then came 2025. At 36 years old, George Springer refused to quit. He hit .252 with 32 home runs and an .800 OPS, helping power the Blue Jays to the American League East title. And when it mattered most, in Game 7 of the ALCS, George delivered a clutch home run that sent Toronto to the World Series for the first time since 1993. The doubters said he was washed. The critics said the scandal defined him. George just kept showing up, still hitting, still mentoring, still proving that the boy who couldn't speak never stops talking with his bat. And while the world was focused on his redemption on the field, George was focused on something bigger off of it. The George Springer Foundation isn't flashy. It doesn't get the headlines his home runs do. But for kids who stutter, it's everything. George partnered with the Stuttering Association for the Young and the American Institute for Stuttering, funding therapy programs for children who couldn't afford them. He's helped provide speech therapy for hundreds of kids over the years. He recorded videos for children, stuttering openly in them, showing them that success doesn't require perfection. One video went viral, George speaking directly to the camera, stuttering through a message.
I think the biggest thing that I would say is to enjoy your life. And it doesn't matter, say what you want to say, be who you want to be. Don't let something that you can't control hold you back.
He spoke at schools, at events, at conferences, always with the same message. And here's the thing, those kids don't care about 2017. They don't care about trash cans or asterisks. They care that a World Series MVP stutters just like they do. Parents have written to George sharing stories of their children, saying their first full sentences without stuttering after watching his videos. 8-year-olds finding hope. Teenagers trying out for baseball teams because George proved you don't need a perfect voice to be great. That's the real lifestyle, not the mansion, not the cars. His lifestyle isn't what you think. It's therapy sessions and foundation work. It's living with a trophy he can never fully own and a voice he fought his whole life to find. And maybe that's what makes him more than just a baseball player. Maybe that's what makes him unstoppable. The boy who couldn't speak became the man who speaks for millions. And no scandal, no asterisk, no amount of booze can take that away. If George's story inspired you, consider supporting the Stuttering Association for the Young at say.org, helping kids find their voice, just like George found his. And subscribe for more stories of athletes who prove that greatness isn't about perfection. It's about showing up when it hurts.